Hey everyone, I can't believe I'm saying this. We are about a month away, less than a month away from the release of The Last Guardian, and Sony invited us to play the game one more time before we finally get our hands on for the full review, and I'm joined here by Scott Butterworth, who had a chance to play the demo, and this is your second time playing the game.
Yeah, I actually played the game at E3 as well, where they were showing off the very opening segment of the game, where you meet Trico, your kind of, beast partner for the first time, and are really just getting a grip on the mechanics. So this more recent demo is set much, much later in the game. Like the demo team that was showing off the game was very adamant about, no, this is really late in the game, so you would have learned a lot of stuff by now, so, don't be too hard on this, you would have learned a lot of stuff. But what was actually really interesting about that caveat, though, is that the section I played wasn't all that complicated. For being so late in the game, it really wasn't all that mechanically demanding. It's still very, very simple and straightforward. The section that I played was essentially just a giant traversal puzzle.
Okay.
I had to make my way across a series of sort of precariously positioned stone towers. Each of them looked like they were ready to collapse at any moment, and you kind of had to hop between them. And so primarily the boy had to ride Trico to have Trico jump between them because the gaps were pretty big, but at certain points there would be something blocking your path. Basically there were these like stained glass mobiles that were very pretty, but for whatever reason Trico did not want to move past them. So at that point, the boy had to like disembark, shimmy across some ledges, or make his way through some tight gaps for like some much more intimate, close quarters platforming, and in some way move or drop those stained glass pieces so that Trico would then progress through the level. You could continue on. So it was just a series of those types of puzzles. It was, figuring out how to get up to a certain location, how to move a certain object, find the lever, shimmy across the ledge, climb back on top of Trico and ride to the next section.
Okay.
So it was all pretty straightforward, pretty brief, very similar to sections of the game that we've seen previously, actually. Okay. Which I guess is maybe a little disappointing, given that it is late in the game, that it is so similar to sections we've already seen from much earlier in the game. It makes me wonder, is the game actually going to be really short? Is it not going to evolve much, or is there not going to be much variety over the course of that experience? Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say, seeing only such a small portion of it, but again, it's interesting that this is late game and yet still pretty minimal.
Okay, so what did you walk away from feeling positive about from this demo?
I will say that the world, universe feels very lived in. You really get this sense that you're part of something bigger, and it's very understated. There's no exposition saying this is what this city is, or this is why these temples are here. It's like no, it's just there, and that's really cool. It's really intriguing for me as a player to just be dropped into this world that very clearly has a history to it, or something about it, some personality, or something you can't quite. You just get a sense of, just a vague sense, and that's really cool to feel immersed in that and yet not really have all the answers handed to you and just kind of wonder what it all means and if you'll get more from it. And I will say that at the end of the demo, a second Trico, a second beast appears very briefly, which we always knew, like we've seen in trailers, that there's more than one, but it was still interesting to see that manifest in game and to have this other creature in full armor kind of pop up and startle you near the end. It was interesting that, I'm very curious to see where they're going with sort of the story elements of the game, because so far everything's been just sort of little teases here and there, and I'm excited to see how that develops.
So I think one of the things that people are very curious about, at least I am, is sort of how the communication works between the two main characters. And so you mentioned running into another Trico.
Yeah.
Did you notice that they had a sort of like when they saw each other, it was like a really happy moment and they were communicating in some way?
No, quite the opposite. That was the interesting thing. So the second Trico wearing armor basically just growled very loudly at my Trico, causing us actually to plummet down a great distance and fall through a stone roof and back down into a chasm. I would imagine back towards the beginning of the game. So So no, it was not a friendly, happy reunion,
Gotcha.
which is interesting. So I don't really know how to interpret that.
Okay.
But to build on your question a little bit, that was actually the other thing that's really interesting about the demo, and this was true of what I played at E3 as well. Trico doesn't always do what you want him to do. It's
Right.
very interesting. He's very much like an actual animal in that regard, or like a cat or something. It's not really interested in following your commands. That continues to be true, and it does require a bit of patience on the player's part, because it's not like, oh, hit forward, you go forward, hit jump, you jump. Like, nope, you are making a suggestion and hoping that Trico pays attention and does it, but there seems to be no guarantee that that's what's going to happen. So it's really interesting getting a feel for that. It's very different from anything else I can really think of. So just that aspect of it, it's such a unique thing. It's like hand-holding in Ico, right? I mean, it was such a simple mechanic, but felt very meaningful in the context of that game. I imagine that will be true of Trico and the way that he interacts with the boy as well.
Yeah. So, okay, the game is coming out soon, and they're confident enough to show it to us at this point. We have to assume that the game is basically finished. So it's fair to ask, are you concerned about anything? Is there anything that you saw that just made you feel like, crap, this might be a problem?
So as I alluded to earlier, the one big concern for me is that the game is still so kind of simplistic, so late in the game that there really aren't any mechanics. It makes me wonder, if there's going to be sort of enough variety to sustain my interest through the course of the entire campaign, or maybe the campaign will be incredibly or unexpectedly brief, and that's why there doesn't seem to be much development between this early section that I've already played and this later section that I just played.
Yeah.
But it's also hard to say, and I think as with a lot of Fumito Ueda's games, it will be about the relationship between the characters and sort of that sense of immersion and almost the sense of wonder that comes from playing the game, and it's really hard to get a sense of that in a 20-30 minute demo. So I'm concerned about gameplay variety, but my hope is that I won't care, because I will be so immersed in the story and so enraptured by everything that's going on that it won't actually matter. Hard to say, again, short demo, but
Right.
that's sort of where I'm at mentally prior to the game's launch, which, as you pointed out, is less than a month away at this point.
Yeah. How do you feel about the style of animations and controls that have carried over, from Ueda's past, right? Like, by all accounts, from what I can tell, this looks like another loose and fluid game. It's not really tight, responsive controls. Is that the case? And do you think, if so, that still works in this day and age?
This is a very interesting question. This is actually something, so I had a chance to interview Ueda as well, in addition to playing the demo, and we talked about this a bit, and people should definitely go to the site and find the interview, which will be probably running alongside this video. It is interesting. It doesn't feel like you're playing a PS3 game. I mean, obviously Last Guardian started as a PS3 project that has now become a PS4 project, but in playing it, I mean, it felt, like a reasonably well put together platformer. I found the controls really responsive enough. Certainly there are some idiosyncrasies that I imagine will take a little getting used to. There are certain sort of fumbly things of trying to climb around him and get on his back, and the camera will kind of position itself in a weird way, and so it wasn't always perfect, but I also didn't find it distractingly bad or anything like that. I mean, it's
Is it
hard to
that
say.
similar to the old style? Does it feel roughly the same?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's very clearly a Fumito Ueda
Yeah.
game. I mean, the art style, the animation, the oversaturated brightness of the world, and even the controls feel in line with Shadow of the Colossus. Or anybody who's a fan of that game, I think will sit down and immediately feel that same sense from this game. Sense being a very vague term for a whole bunch of different things that all contribute to the overall feel of the experience. But yeah, it definitely feels like a Ueda game.
Did you have any, last question, any really interesting anecdotes about the development, or answers to questions, or, maybe people have an idea about this game and he's no, that's not the case. What was the most surprising thing?
I think maybe the most interesting thing he told me is that he set out to create something that was timeless. That was the goal, which is a really ambitious and you could argue almost arrogant approach to just decide consciously up front, we're going to make something timeless.
Yeah.
So hearing his response for how you make something timeless, or how you approach a project with the intent of creating something to stand the test of time, his response was really interesting. And just hearing him talk, I mean, he really is kind of the auteur of gaming, right? I mean, it sounds like such a pretentious title, but I think it's well earned. I mean, he's a really interesting and artistically minded person. So hearing him talk about that was great. And I encourage people to go read that interview.
All right. Well, we potentially have a timeless game on our hands, and we'll know in just a few weeks' time. For more Last Guardian coverage, stay tuned to GameSpot.com and check us out on YouTube/GameSpot.